Well, as you can see, we're continuing our study on Proverbs. This morning, we're going to be looking at what Proverbs teaches about wealth. This is all pretty exciting. It's pretty exciting because I'm pretty sure that based on this material, you will all be pretty loaded here in a few weeks, actually. Well, provided that you order my new book, Millionaire in 30 Days. Low price, $29.95. You can see the toll-free number you can call to order that up on the screen. So just go ahead and get your order in. I write under a pseudonym, pen name. So if you're looking it up on Amazon, you'll want to look up Buck Fast Cash there. So, okay, maybe not. Maybe not. In all seriousness, this is an important topic, and while it might be considered poor form to talk about politics, religion, and money in polite company, the Bible talks a lot about money. And the Proverbs specifically talk a lot about money. So if we as a church or if we as individuals aren't bringing the scriptures to bear on our finances, then we're quite simply being unbiblical and unfaithful. And that's not what we want to do. That's not what we want to do. So here we are, humbly submitting to what God through Proverbs teaches us about wisdom and wealth. By way of game plan or outline for this morning, we'll try to march through 5 points here, and that'll structure our study. I should probably say at the outset, I will use the term wealth largely synonymous with money or with finances. That's what I have in mind. I'm not talking about yachts and things like that. Nothing wrong with yachts, I suppose. But that's not what I'm talking about. This isn't about the 1%. This is what Proverbs says to all of us here. Applies to all of us. I should also note, second caveat here up front, really just going to be focusing on Proverbs and trying to hear from what Proverbs teaches. This is not going to be a comprehensive survey of what all the scriptures say about money or wealth. That would take a long time. We're just going to try to dig down here and hear from the overall tone of what Proverbs says on this subject. Okay, so let's dive in then. Our first point here, wealth is a blessing. Right at the outset, as we consider what Proverbs says about wealth, we should just note and observe the general posture that Proverbs has towards money. And namely, on the whole, taken in broad swath, wealth is seen as a good thing in Proverbs. It is a blessing, not a curse. Now, it isn't an unambiguous good. It isn't good in and of itself, and it certainly isn't our highest good. But it is generally seen as a good thing. So, for example, here's what Wisdom Personified says in chapter 8. Riches and honor are with me, enduring wealth and righteousness. And this is good grounding for us out of the gate. Wisdom is preeminently the quality of kings. And kings aren't paupers, right? Sometimes people think of wealth as a bad thing, as an evil, as something to be renounced. So some monks, for example, would take vows in centuries gone past of poverty, vowing to own no more than 6 things, right? Well, simply stated, renouncing material wealth is not true righteousness. As the New Testament says, don't confuse asceticism with holiness, okay? Poverty in the Proverbs is not set forth as some kind of goal that you're striving for. To the contrary, in Proverbs, it's kind of the other way around. Foolish behaviors and decisions lead towards poverty. Now again, certainly, you got to take things on balance. That's not to say that poverty is always the result of folly. Poverty can be the result of many things, but it is to say that in the realm of finances, folly tends towards poverty and wisdom tends towards wealth. So right at the outset, as we get grounded in what Proverbs teaches about wealth, we should just observe the general orientation. Wealth is generally a good thing. It is generally a blessing. Now, Just because wealth is not a curse doesn't mean that it doesn't come with dangers. Okay, there were a lot of negatives in there, it's occurring to me. Positively stated, wealth comes with dangers, okay? So we have to be on guard against that. And the Proverbs talk a lot about the dangers of wealth, warning us about these things. So let's dive in and see a few of these. The first danger we can cite is the temptation to idolize wealth. As we go throughout here, there's so many proverbs on wealth. I could list like 1,000 under each of these, well, not 1,000, a lot under each of these bullets. I'm not going to. I'm going to try and keep it pithy. But here's one on this subject, Proverbs 23, 4 through 5. Do not toil to acquire wealth. Be discerning enough to desist. When your eyes light on it, it is gone, for suddenly it sprouts wings, flying like an eagle toward heaven. We can be tempted to pursue wealth in such a way that we idolize it, that we toil for it. We labor relentlessly to attain it. We lack wisdom to know when to stop, when to desist. Look, this is getting into the idolization of wealth aspect. God promises that if we seek him with all our heart, we will find him. That's what he says in Jeremiah 23. That same promise doesn't apply to wealth. You can't seek wealth with all your heart and be assured to find it and satisfaction. That's not how it works. You can be tempted to idolize wealth, but that's not the way things work. It might just sprout wings and fly away. So here's the first danger, the first thing to be on guard against. Don't idolize wealth. Don't set all your affections and energies upon attaining wealth. Well, that kind of leads us to a second danger related to the first, which is the temptation toward greed. Money appears to provide, to generate, to yield satisfaction for us, but it never really satisfies. And in response to that failure to achieve satisfaction through wealth, we can desire more and more of it in a way that turns into greed. Greed, again, comes up a lot in the Proverbs. So let's bounce through a couple here. 15:27, whoever is greedy for unjust gain troubles his own household, but he who hates bribes will live. 28:25, a greedy man stirs up strife, but the one who trusts in the Lord will be enriched. And then back in chapter 1, such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessors. Simply put, greed is a big problem. You just look at these verses and say, what does greed do? What does greed lead to? It leads to troubles in relationships. It leads to strife. It leads to deprivation of life, of true flourishing, of true fruitfulness. In other words, greed is not just a matter of some internal heart disposition that just impacts you. It isn't just about having the wrong attitude towards money. No, greed is a sin, right? Because greed puts supreme priority on money. It's willing to take any measures, any routes to get it, which is why there are these references to unjust gain here in these verses, which of course, that taking any measure to get wealth leads to conflicts and strife because you dehumanize other people. Either you fail to honor your obligations towards them and your family and your friends and your church, or because you just see other people as objects in your own personal monopoly game, either as useful tools for getting wealth or as obstacles impeding your way. So greed promises gain. It promises increase, but in the end, it actually leads to withering away. As it says, it takes away the life of its possessors. So as we think about the second danger here associated with wealth, we need to hear these proverbs and be wise. Let's be on guard against greed. Okay, a third danger here, a third wise warning we can note from Proverbs is that wealth comes with challenges. In the words of a contemporary proverb, mo money, mo problems. So Proverbs 13:8, the ransom of a man's life is his wealth, but a poor man hears no threat. When you don't have much, you don't have much to lose, right? But that's not the case when you gain more, when you get more stuff. You've probably experienced this in different ways. Perhaps when you bought your first house. Seems great, right? You're no longer renting. You're no longer throwing money away. You're building equity. Cha-ching, right? It's great. But then your AC goes out, and you go to call your landlord and let him know he's got a problem and realize it's your problem. It's your house. There you go. Your landlord is now you. So your wealth, your house in this instance, exposes you to new problems you didn't have to worry about before. And that's something we need to be wise to. We shouldn't expect more wealth to solve all our problems. And to the contrary, we should expect and be prepared that new problems come up when we have more stuff, when we gain more wealth. More money, more problems. Okay. Last danger to hit on as we think about wealth. Proverbs teaches that our financial state of affairs can corrupt our relationship with the Lord. And here there's a ditch on both sides of the road. So if you're familiar with the Proverbs teaching on wealth, this is probably a familiar passage here in chapter 30. It says, 2 things I ask of you, deny them not to me before I die. Remove from me, far from me, falsehood and lying. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me, lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God. So we can note here there are dangers associated with both poverty and with riches. And both of them fundamentally involve our relationship with God. So you can consider the poverty side of things here. Certainly it is possible for poverty to lead to increased dependence and trust on God. That would be a great outcome from need, from dependence. We see that in Paul's life, for example. But there's also a danger associated with poverty that instead we resent God and conduct ourselves in unrighteous ways to get what we think we need. If we respond to the estate of poverty in that kind of way, we'll wind up, as the Proverb says, profaning the name of our God. So there's a danger there, danger on the poverty side to be aware of, to not resent God. Riches, on the other hand, present a different kind of danger in our relationship with God. Here, the danger is that we deny God because we see no need for him. We are self-sufficient. We are able to provide for all our needs. And for us, in America, in the West, and in Plainfield, this is probably the bigger danger that we need to guard against. If we're not careful, we can respond to the experience of wealth by denying, in practice, if not verbally, by denying the Lord himself. So let's not do that. Let's be wise. Let's hear the warning of Proverbs. Okay, so those are some dangers. We've seen from Proverbs that wealth is it's a blessing. It's generally a good thing. At the same time, it comes with dangers we need to be wise to. But does Proverbs say anything about gaining wealth, about how to get wealth? Does it say anything on that subject? Well, as you might guess, it does. It says a lot on this subject. So let's start with what Proverbs teaches about how to gain wealth and then how not to get wealth. So first up, how to gain wealth, productive labor. The overarching, consistent testimony in Proverbs is that wealth, is that money comes from productive labor. In other words, if you want to have money to pay your rent, to buy food, and so on, there's a pretty simple approach. Get a job and work hard at it. So some instances in the Proverbs here, 12:11, whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense. Later in chapter 12, whoever is slothful will not roast his game, but the diligent man will get precious wealth. This is how the world works. This is how God designed things. It's basic economics. Our labor transforms potentiality into actuality, right? It creates something. Through effort, through inputting energy, we create something of value, some service or some good that has value, that has money associated with it then. It generates wealth, right? And for us, that comes generally in the form of a paycheck. But look, this comes through actual work, not just talk about work. So in chapter 14, in all toil there is profit, but mere talk tends only to poverty. Perhaps you've been around someone or know someone who likes to talk about what he'll do down the road, about dreams. I've got dreams I have of what I can do, about fulfillment that he'll find in some job down the road. And all the while, he's living in his parents' basement doing nothing, right? To that, the Proverbs have a very plain message, one that my dad repeated to us a lot growing up. Get off the couch, get a haircut, get a job, right? Like that's some basic Kentucky wisdom from my dad there. That's pretty much what the Proverbs say. Because, like to tie back to Jordan's sermon some weeks ago, if you fail to do that, even if it's because you can't find a job that's fulfilling for you, what you wind up doing is making yourself a burden to others. And that's not loving, that's selfish, right? Similarly, some people don't work hard and then wonder why they're not earning the income that they'd like to earn, right? They're not getting the raise, they're not getting the promotion, and they're not working hard. Laziness, sloth, those things are lambasted throughout the Proverbs. I guess I didn't put it on the screen here, but in chapter 13, the soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, while the soul of the diligent is richly supplied. Sloth is the corruption of the creation mandate, of the charge that God gave Adam in the garden, and as such, sloth leads to want. So, how do we get wealth? How do we provide for our families? The testimony of the Proverbs is not complicated. It's pretty simple. The primary means is through diligent, productive labor. What about how we shouldn't get wealth? Like if that's the positive side of the equation, what shouldn't we be doing? What shouldn't we be seeking as we seek to gain wealth? Well, Proverbs is wise, as you'd imagine. It knows the desirability of wealth and the hearts of men. And so in Proverbs, God gives us direction also about how we aren't supposed to be going about gaining wealth. And we can note a couple of the don'ts that appear here in the book. So the first one, deceit and injustice. The Proverbs are realistic. Like they operate in the real world. And in the real world, some people get wealth through lies, through trickery, through deceit, through taking advantage of others. Sadly, that happens. Perhaps we know or have experienced that or seen that in others. But I won't mince words here because the scriptures don't mince words. God hates that, right? So chapter 11, a false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. In chapter 22, do not rob the poor because he is poor or crush the afflicted at the gate. For the Lord will plead their cause and rob of life those who rob them. Now, I certainly hope this doesn't apply to any of us, but it should stand as a firm warning for us. If any part of our income comes through cutting corners, through activity that isn't above board, through capitalizing on the vulnerable position that others might be in, the Lord will be against us. He hates that. This is not a matter of being a hard-nosed businessman. This is a matter of righteousness, right? We are not to gain wealth through deceit or injustice. Well, the second avenue that Proverbs talks about on how not to gain wealth is, we could put it, get-rich-quick schemes. This is a different kind of error, different kind of mistake here. So a couple verses, 28, 19 through 20. Whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits will have plenty of poverty. A faithful man will abound with blessings, but whoever hastens to be rich will not go unpunished. Or back in chapter 21, the plans of the diligent surely lead to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. Look, we can understand the appeal of get-rich-quick schemes, right? It's right there in the name. You get rich quick. Like, awesome. That sounds pretty good to me, right? What's not to like? In essence, we might think, living here in 2025, if I have the year right, I got the date wrong earlier, but anyway, we might think that we are enlightened, modern people, but our propensity to fall into get-rich-quick schemes just really belies our belief in magic, right? And while such things occasionally might work out for some people, after all, someone has to win the lottery, right? Most of the time, these things are pure gambling. But we see these all around us. And often, not coincidentally, often they're pitched to us by people who would just happen to benefit by us participating in that plan or scheme or program. Look at how that worked out. That worked out great. So whether it's from the lottery to penny stocks to cryptocurrency, we need to learn from the Proverbs to be wise and to pursue financial gain in the tried and true way, in the way that creates value, not through magic, not through get-rich-quick schemes. So that's the getting wealth side of things. What about the stewarding wealth? When it comes to, we've talked about how you gain wealth, what Proverbs sets forth and teaches there. What do we do when we have money? What should we be doing with it? What should we not be doing with it? Well, again, the Proverbs has a lot to say on both sides of that. So we can kind of use Paul's put on, put off kind of imagery here and talk about a few on each side of the equation. Put on. The first priority when it comes to stewarding wealth is that we honor God with our wealth. So Jeff will be preaching on Proverbs 3 here later. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will be bursting with wine. While we recognize that the money we have, our wealth, comes proximately through our own work, we also recognize that ultimately it comes from not our employer, but the Lord. He's the one who graciously gives. And therefore, our first priority ought to be that we honor God, the one who gives us wealth, with that wealth that he gives us. What's that look like? Well, certainly in the broadest sense of honoring God with our wealth, it looks like using money for good purposes, for good ends, for things that glorify God rather than bring dishonor to his name. And in the narrow sense of the term, narrow sense of honoring God, it looks like giving back to the Lord. I'm not going to go into a whole extended analysis of tithing, for example, of giving 10% and the applicability of that in the New Testament and the New Covenant. Suffice it to say, I think that tithe principle continues. It predates the Mosaic covenant, for instance. It goes all the way back to Abraham. And moreover, if we think about the overall shape of the New Testament teaching on things, if we've had our minds at all shaped by Paul and his how much more logic of the New Covenant, I'd suggest we should see the tithe as a floor and not a ceiling on our giving to the Lord, to our local church and other ministries. But here's the point, regardless of your view on the tithe, here's the point. What we do with our money first, what we do with our first fruits, is that we give to the Lord. We don't wait until our income hits some level. We don't wait until we have a full-time job. We don't wait until we're out of our parents' households. We have income, our first fruits go to the Lord. We honor God with our wealth. We don't have to wait until we have all our other bills taken care of. The tithe is not a bill, it's a way of honoring God. And as Proverbs 3 puts it, God is able to provide for us abundantly. So we can give immediately off the top. That's the first thing. The first thing to put on is honoring God with our wealth. But there's more. Proverbs has more to say than just giving directly to the Lord and his gospel work. Proverbs again and again commends generosity. I could just rattle through verse after verse, but how about just 3 here? 14:21, whoever despises his neighbor is a sinner, but blessed is he who is generous to the poor. Later in the chapter, verse 31, whoever oppresses a poor man insults his maker, but he who is generous to the needy honors him. And then last one here in chapter 11, one gives freely, yet grows all the richer. Another withholds what he should give and only suffers want. As those who have been greatly blessed by the Lord, as those who are made in the image of the divine giver, we ought to be generous people, helping to meet the needs of others around us. Now, maybe that topic, maybe the thought of giving to the needy, immediately prompts in your mind a bunch of caveats and rationalizations. So-and-so's only going to squander this, so-and-so should work more, so-and-so should make better decisions, and so on. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be wise in our generosity. To say that would be kind of opposite of the whole of Proverbs, right? We should be wise, including our generosity. But if your immediate instinct, when the scriptures speak about giving to the needy, is to come up with 1,000 reasons why that doesn't apply to you, perhaps you need to consider if you're on the wrong side of these proverbs here. Perhaps you're actually despising your neighbor and then covering it with a self-justifying veneer of wisdom, right? We should be generous in disposition and generous in action. And we can do this in everyday, ordinary life, right? As we hear of needs that others have around us. As I listened to one pastor, he said, you can give to others even if it's not tax deductible, right? Like, we can be generous for reasons other than a tax break, right? We can be generous to imitate our Father in heaven. And we can do this regardless of our needs that we might have, regardless of our means, because we trust God to continue to meet our needs. What 11:24 winds up saying, what we should. Like, there's a should to generosity, and we can do that as we trust God to continue to provide for us as well. So those are some things to put on. Put on honoring God with our wealth, put on generosity. How about some things to put off? What should we put off if we're to steward our wealth faithfully? Let's look at a couple. First off, overconsumption. This is all too common. Buying too much stuff, right? 21:17, whoever loves pleasure will be a poor man. He who loves wine and oil will not be rich. A couple verses down, precious treasure and oil are in a wise man's dwelling, but a foolish man devours it. This is pretty simple, right? If we want to continue to have money, if we want to be able to afford a house or a retirement or an education down the line, that needs to start with not spending all of it right now, right? That's pretty simple. That's how it goes. And yet, this can be so hard. While buy with one click and same-day delivery might be modern phenomena, the root issue of consumer culture is not a new one. So Proverbs 27, Sheol, the realm of the dead, Sheol and Abaddon are never satisfied, and never satisfied are the eyes of man. We think we're going to find satisfaction in that next purchase, in that next vacation, in the next vehicle, but we won't. It's not how it works. Our covetous eyes are like the realm of the dead. The thing we desire next is not going to be life-giving. So, we need to be disciplined. We need to tell ourselves no, right? Not just our kids no. Tell yourself no, right? I get it. It's really easy, but constantly filling up your Amazon cart or imitating your neighbor in some big purchase because obviously they're making it work somehow, that is not the way of wisdom. As an aside, odds are your neighbor is not making it work with that new pool and new car and travel sports and so on. They're probably not making it work, right? You're not auditing their books. You look at the stats and things, how low our savings rate is and how high our consumer debt is. They're probably not making it work. So don't go that direction. If we're to steward wealth well, we need to grow in the fruit of the Spirit that is self-control as we reorient our craving for satisfaction to the Lord himself. All right, the second thing to put off that Proverbs highlights is bad financial arrangements. 11:15, whoever puts up security for a stranger will surely suffer harm, but he who hates striking hands in pledge is secure. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is the slave of the lender. It's foolish to jump into an agreement or a contract without understanding all the terms, without thinking things through, without making a plan. And that's particularly the case with debt. It is so easy to make big purchases, to spend a lot of money without any money down, right? That is really easy to do in a way that takes years and years and years to pay off and at great expense due to interest. Just to take one example, I think it must be standard training for car salesmen to ask you the question, what payment do you want? Rather than tell you what the total price of the vehicle is and what it's going to cost, because they can make a payment work as long as you pay it off over 35 years at 8% interest, right? It's so easy to do that. I think young people in particular need to be aware of this. I know that getting started is hard. I know that it's tough, and it's really tempting when you start to get an income to spend money in such a way that what you have looks like what your parents have. Spoiler alert, your parents are a lot older than you. They've been working a lot longer than you. Their income is probably more than what yours is. You're not going to be able to afford the same vehicle that they had, the same house that they had, the same stuff that they had. Just because you can make payment X in isolation of all your other obligations doesn't mean it's a wise financial decision. You start stacking this payment and that payment and that payment on another, and all of a sudden you're in a trap, and all your money is going to making payments. You're trapped, you're stuck in debt, you're a slave of the lender. So that's something to be wise to. Not saying never borrow money or anything like that, but if we're going to be wise with our wealth, if we're going to steward it well, we need to be wary of entering bad financial arrangements. All right, last point as we close out here, and if we take one thing from this lesson, I pray that it would be this: money is not our ultimate good. That is the most prominent and consistent teaching about money throughout the whole book of Proverbs. Just to highlight a few verses here, 15, 16, and 17. Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and trouble with it. Better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a fattened ox and hatred with it. 11:4, riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. Better is a poor man who walks in his integrity than a rich man who's crooked in his ways. And then 22:1, a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favor is better than silver or gold. What's better than wealth? The fear of the Lord. loving relationships, righteousness, integrity, reputation. All these things are far, far better. They're far, far more important than wealth. When push comes to shove, when we have to make decisions with trade-offs, the Proverbs are really, really helpful here because they tell us very plainly X is better than Y. And that's what we have in all of these Proverbs and others throughout the book. If we face a decision, for instance, where we can have more wealth, but at the expense of relationships, Proverbs says we would be a fool to choose more wealth. If we could have more money, but we'd have to do things a bit shady, we'd have to do things a little under the table, we'd have to maybe not report that income on our tax return. The decision should be obvious. Righteousness and integrity are much more important than that extra dough. And if the decision is between our relationship with God, serving and honoring Him, and our side hustle, wisdom knows what the priority is. The fear of the Lord, that's our main job. Any potential paid position, even our day job, is only a side hustle by comparison to the fear of the Lord. That's the main thing. Money is not our ultimate good. Well, we'll wrap there. That's just a summary of what Proverbs says. There's much more in the book, but that's all we have time for. So we'll conclude there. Thanks.